Our next speaker is Bridget from the University of Georgia. Her topic is a quantitative acoustic approach to eye-to-eye weakening among Detroit African American and Appalachian white Southern migrants.
Live weakening variants and free voice following environment are characteristics of conservative Southern white varieties of English and African American English. Live weakening before voiceless consonant is typically described as a more recent change affecting progressive Southern white varieties. The canonical pattern for I reported in the literature for African American English is for the glide to be weakened in free voice in word final context and diphthongal in the free voiceless context. Several recent studies of I in African American English, however, report free voiceless glide weakening. The results presented in this study provide new evidence that this change is not restricted to Southern white varieties. Several different types of methods are utilized in variation studies of I. Impressionistic reports dominate sociolinguistic descriptions of this vowel. These studies treat I in a binary fashion as either monophthongal or diphthongal. However, as Thomas 2001 points out, the length of the glide varies considerably between fully diphthongal variants with short on glide and completely monophthongal variants. And you might know what monophthongal or very glide variant sounds like, just listen to me. All Methods for acoustic studies of I vary, but researchers typically do not specify the length and direction of glide movement for F1 and F2 in a precise manner. For example, whether tokens show glide movement in the F1 dimension, the F2 dimension, or both. This study addresses these methodological limitations, and the methods are given in two on their handout. I'll let you read through those yourself. The analysis of I quantifies diphthongization by comparing F1 and F2 movement in this vowel, which exhibits varying degrees of diphthongization, or glide listening, depending on how you look at it, with the F1 and F2 movement in the A vowel as in father. This is an anchor vowel that I use for comparison. I use it as a reference because it is expected to show little, if any, diphthongization. Obviously, it's not diphthong. The differences between midpoint and measurements taken 25 milliseconds before the end of the offset in F1 and F2 were calculated for both these vowels. In Table 1 gives tokens of I and R according to speaker and following environment. The results. The differences between coordinate frequency measurements taken at midpoint and 25 milliseconds before the end of the offset in F1 F2 were calculated for tokens of A and I from the four youngest speakers in the Appalachian and African American groups. The two older speakers are excluded from this part of the analysis because the goal is to examine patterns of use by phonetic content. The older African American speakers show a pattern of following voice conditioning for I glide weakening, while middle-aged and younger speakers do not. Although A as a father is less diphthongal than I, some movement in F1 and F2 is expected due to co-articulation of the following consonant. A completely glide weakened or monophthongal I should show no more movement than A. It should be very similar. Whereas a diphthongal I will show movement resulting from both phonetic context and some degree of movement into the second element of the diphthong, usually a low, mid, or high front vowel, depending on the degree of weakening. Tables 2 and 3 show the change in curves from midpoint to offset in F1 and F2 for both vowels, ethnicity, and voice versus voiceless context. 2 GLM analyses of variance were conducted for F1 and F2 movement with 3 independent factors: vowel, A and I, ethnicity, African American and Appalachian, and context, voice versus voiceless. Tables 4 and 5 show the main effects for vowel, ethnicity, and context, and the interactions. For F1, the significant main effect for vowel, which is shown in Table 4, demonstrates that movement for I was significantly greater than for that of A overall. There was also a significant main effect for environment, with change from midpoint to offset for free voice vowels being greater than that for free voiceless. So this is a reversal of what we would expect based on most reports. Although there were no significant main effects for least not on a group basis. Later we will see that this does not hold for the older first-generation African Americans. The Appalachian group's I was overall more diphthong in F2 than the African American I, but it was still 5%. The point is that a true monophone with no movement is probably rare in American English. Even the ah vowel shows some movement from midpoint to offset for F1 and F2. The data set is the same as in the previous section, except for the inclusion of all 6 African American and all 6 Appalachian speakers in the next part of your handout. For each vowel, the relevant dependent variables are F1 movement, and that's F1 frequency at midpoint minus that at offset. F2 movement, F2 frequency at midpoint minus that at offset. In this speaker-by-speaker analysis, the independent variables are vowel, I or ah, context, voice or voices. Average movement, standard deviations, and ends for each speaker in F1 and F2 are shown in Table 8, that's for the African American speakers, and Table 9 for the Appalachian speakers. For each individual speaker, 2 DLM analyses variants were conducted, one for F1 movement and one for F2 movement, in order to test for main effects and interactions of vowel and context. First, I discuss main effects for vowel. A significant main effect by vowel means that movement for I was significantly greater than that for ah across phonetic context, voice and voices. If there is no main effect for vowel and no significant interaction in context, then there is no significant difference at all in the movement between I and ah. And this would be 100% monophonization. If there was no significant main effect but a significant interaction between vowel and context, then one has to examine vowels within voicing context and voicing context within vowels. We'll talk about these interactions a little bit later. All speakers, except for speaker